Hello and welcome to another interview in our series of Let's Talk podcasts. From substance use prevention to quality research, treatment of addiction and recovery from it, these award-winning podcasts focus on the issues of importance to Hazel and Betty Ford, issues that matter to you too. I'm your host, William C. Moyers, and yes, it does look a little bit different in here today. If you're a fan of these podcasts, then you'll note that this time around we've had to do things a little bit differently. As we all know, a lot has changed in the world since our last round of podcast interviews back in the winter of 2020. Hazel and Betty Ford takes seriously the need to do everything possible to prevent the spread of coronavirus among our patients and our employees. Even here in the studio, we are following public health guidelines. As a result, I can take off my mask for this interview because the production crew, the executive producer, and yes, even my guest are elsewhere in the building. Today we are joined by Dr. Tim Portinga, the Manager of Mental Health Services at Hazel and Betty Ford's Youth Center in suburban Minneapolis. Tim has been with our organization since 1999. Today we take up a very challenging topic, teenagers, substance use, and family issues. Tim, this sounds like a recipe for stress and anxiety.
Yes, absolutely so. I think one of the hardest things that families ever go through is the experience of watching a son or daughter start to have problems with substance use. So many parents feel just a lack of power and understanding. Their reactions are often not useful, to be blunt.
What do you mean by not useful?
So usually when kids start to have problems with substance use, parents start to understand that something's wrong. And usually it's subtle. They'll start to see the kids are deteriorating in their grades, in their school, their work, their relationships are starting to come apart. They'll notice that their kid doesn't always tell the truth. And frankly, this is one of the biggest signs that parents see, first of all, is that 1 + 1 doesn't always equal 2 anymore. And parents start to understand 1 + 1 is sometimes 3 or 4. Their radar's going off, but they can't understand what's happening. The nature of substance use, of course, is to keep it secret, particularly with younger adults, because of all the reasons that are obvious around disciplinary issues and all that. Usually, parents will respond by getting critical. Where were you? What were you doing? Where'd that money go? What happened to the car? And those kinds of questions will tend to drive their son or daughter even further away. Essentially, one of the biggest things that come when kids start having problems with substance use, first of all, is a lack of trust. Families will still love each other, of course, but the trust starts to become problematic. And once trust starts to break down, you inevitably see much more conflict within the family in terms of communication styles, relationships. It's a natural thing when you don't understand what's going on with somebody to start asking questions, to start knocking on that door to try to figure out what's going on. But often that serves to push the young person away.
So Dr. Portinga, what should a parent do? I mean, as you said, it's only a natural reaction. There's probably some fear and anxiety in there on the part of the parent. They want their child not to go down that road. They want their child to be healthy. What do you tell the parent?
Yes. So you start with communication stuff. Often people are communicating, like I was saying, in critical kinds of ways. You did this, you did that, where is this? Declarative, accusatory types of statements. You want to morph over to statements that take responsibility for their own emotions and are direct and accurate about the questions. When I see that you're home late, I feel nervous. Asking questions that are more about their own individual issues and trying to make sure that that empathy and compassion bond stays intact instead of pushing them away.
That's not easy.
No, it's not. And one of the biggest pieces that goes along with that course too is an understanding of how the person themselves are affected. One of the things that we know with people that live with folks that are having substance abuse issues is that they start to doubt themselves. They wonder about their own ability to parent. They start to isolate themselves. These are not the types of issues that parents want to talk to their other family members about. It's certainly not what you talk to your neighbor about. how they found a bunch of empty bottles in the back seat of their car, for instance. So typically what parents will do is start to isolate. They'll start to lose communication with family members and coworkers, and they start to have their own issues. They feel sad, worried, scared. The other side of that often is anger. When people get sad and worried, they tend to become aggressive as well. Further compounds the problem. So it's really important for parents to understand that they need to take care of themselves as well. They have to focus on the things that keep them healthy.
And we know that substances affect all the organs of a young person's body, but the irony of it is the one that it has a profound effect on is the organ in the body that tends to develop last, correct? Can you talk more about the developmental pathway that is affected by substance use?
Yeah, this is one of the most interesting pieces of it, I think. Adolescence, young adulthood is an absolutely fascinating stage in life because what we know about brains at that point is that they're probably at their peak of their ability to do abstract reasoning, straight up memory work, learn new skills, take a crazy situation, make sense of it, and move forward. They can do trigonometry and calculus, for God's sakes, right? I'm lost there now. Yeah. And interestingly enough, the last part of their brain to develop is this prefrontal cortex here right behind their forehead, and that's the part of the brain that's in charge of executive functioning, long-term decision making, to some degree sort of ethical and values types of judgments. That's unfortunately the last part of our brain to develop. So a big part of that is also delay of gratification. How do I make myself do my homework on Wednesday for a good grade at the end of the week? So we have this interesting situation for young men and young women are incredibly smart from a pure horsepower point of view, but have a really hard time thinking long term in terms of what kind of effects they're going to have from a behavior right now. A behavior in the moment is really hard for them to translate into a future reality. Developmentally, we have a couple different things. This part of our brain develops through ongoing organic response. We used to think that that part of the brain was done 18, 19 years old. It's probably more like late 20s or 30 before that part of the brain is completely wired. But the other thing that we know is a lot of substance use tends to slow down the development of that part of the brain. Increasingly, we're aware that cannabis is one of the substances that tends to slow down the neural development of our prefrontal cortex. There are actual changes in the complexity and sophistication of the neural network in that part of the brain due to significant substance use. The evidence is good around neuroplasticity. That part of the brain can start to repair itself over time. But there are significant deficits from long-term and serious cannabis use at that point.
So then we get to the point where the young person has substance use disorder and needs treatment. Our facility in suburban Minneapolis and Plymouth has been there for a long time. What do you see in terms of the demographics of substance use among the patients that we treat?
So I think, again, given my own personal history, we used to get an awful lot of young men and women that were using primarily alcohol and cannabis. They would experiment with other substances sort of as a drug of opportunity, but in some ways they were similar to older adults. They would have a primary drug of choice, usually cannabis or alcohol. Now, what we see is more significant polysubstance use. It's rare that I have a patient now that just uses one substance and dabbles with something else. I often have kids that are using 4 or 5 substances that all qualify for substance use disorder type of diagnosis. And the particularly scary thing has been the increase in opiate use. 15 years ago, last time I saw the numbers, I was looking at between 4 or 5%, 6% of my patients that were using opiates as their primary drug. Last time I saw the numbers a little over a year ago, now it's 37%. And this is so incredibly dangerous, and I think our country is aware of the risks with this now. And it really heightens our need for accurate and significant care very quickly for these young men and women.
Accurate and significant care for young men and women, and of course, lots of young men and women do receive treatment.
Yes.
Does treatment work for young people?
Yes. That's a good question. Yes. Treatment absolutely works. There's been a fair amount of long-term outcome research around young men and women going through treatment centers. It's very difficult to do. I'm going to put a huge asterisk in there. But looking for correlations in terms of what works or not, interestingly, and I think this will be one that you like, William, one of the most significant correlations for being sober 1 year, 2 years out the road is how many meetings they're going to over the course of a week.
Of course.
So the number is 3.75.
Wow.
The average person that's sober a year, 2 years down the road coming out of even an adolescent treatment center is 3.75 meetings per week. I've always loved that number for that reason. There it is.
The 0.75 piece
Yes.
is interesting. So, Dr. Portinga, then young people do get treatment. They do recover.
Yep.
They've got to go back into that family dynamic that was very different than what they were in before they found recovery.
Yes.
Talk just a little bit with the few minutes that we have. How does a family reintegrate a teenager or young adult into the family after they found recovery?
It takes a very clear-headed, functional approach early on. Empathetic compassion, tremendous amount of love. Usually that will be intact in the family system. But what we will know is that the trust is just plain not there. So we need to be very open and honest about the fact that the trust is broken down in the family system. Simple but not easy. Trust is always built by doing what you say you're going to do, telling the truth. And the third thing, which is the hardest of them all, is admitting when you make a mistake. But focusing on those three things in simple communication and understanding that the truth is ultimately going to be the thing that rebuilds trust. Understanding we love each other, but trust is not the same thing as love. We can't blackmail people who love us for trust. We have to earn trust over time. And essentially, if I just wrap this up a little bit, what addiction teaches families is to shut up, to isolate, to stop talking, to avoid the topic, because it's painful to discuss these things. Recovery tries to set that on its head. It's much more important to start talking now, to be simple and clear and precise about how these trust levels work and where we are and what our plan is. Ultimately, it comes down to rebuilding trust.
So no wonder then that recovery is not a destination, it's a journey.
Yes. And often families need a coach. They sometimes will do better with a therapist or with a connection program, somebody to help them learn that communication skills early on. I never doubt a family's sincerity. They love each other. I've seen parents absolutely go for the wall to try to protect their kid. But this trust thing is a really delicate thing to build, and it takes time.
Well, thank you, Dr. Tim Portinga, for emphasizing the fact that trust does take time. Thanks for filling in a lot of the information I'm sure that people were looking for today on this program. Dr. Tim Portinga is the manager of our mental health services at our youth facility in suburban Plymouth. And as we can see from your time with us today, you have a deep and rich knowledge and a real empathy for young people who need to find recovery from mental health and substance use. Thank you, Dr. Portinga, for being with us today.
Thank you.
And thanks to all of you for joining us. Be sure to tune in again for another edition of our regular podcasts, Let's Talk. On behalf of our executive producer, Lisa Stangl, and our podcast team from Blue Moon Productions in the Twin Cities, we want to remind you to stay safe and stay healthy in these times and all the time. We'll see you again.